It was just after sunset when I heard a faint noise outside my living room window. I did my best to ignore it, thinking it was probably one of the neighbors' flighty animals sneaking down the block again. There was one heathen in particular who found its way to my front steps a time or two, doing its best to ditch the family and the new puppy they brought home. As I sat on my couch, knee-deep in one of those trashy television shows that help numb the mind after a long day at work, the noise grew closer, louder. My back cracked like a light stick when I stood up to stretch, and I muted the television. I shuffled to the front door and placed my ear on the cool surface, listening carefully. A loud meow, close enough to be right on the other side, drifted in. Carefully, as not to scare my visitor off, I opened the door and peeked out. Right at my feet stood a small cat. It wasn't quite a kitten, but couldn't be more than a year old. From my childhood experience of growing up with kittens my mother fell in love with at first sight, I'd say he was 6 or 7 months old. Its fur was a mix of white and gray in scattered patches, and its eyes were like ice, blue and loud. "Hi, little one," I cooed. I opened the door the rest of the way and slowly bent down. "Where'd you come from?" Before I could put my hand out for it to smell that I was not a threat, the cat brushed past me and sauntered right into my living room. There was no hesitation and no fear in entering a stranger's home. I stood confused and a bit dumbfounded as I watched it curl up on one of the couch pillows and fall fast asleep. Early the next morning, I woke to the feeling of being watched. I extracted myself from deep under my covers and sat up on the edge of the bed. Doing the usual morning once-over of my room as I finished waking up, my eyes landed on the small ball of fur watching me from the corner of the room. It had completely slipped my morning fog-filled mind that I had let astray in the night before. Well, really it let itself in. "Jesus," I muttered. My heart was beating hard in my chest at the shock. We stared at one another for a few minutes. The cat's blue-eyed stare left an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, but it was difficult to look away. It felt like there was something the cat needed to say, though the thought of a talking cat made me feel insane. I tore my eyes away and grabbed my robe to head down to the kitchen. I needed caffeine. The cat followed in my wake down the steps, through the hallway, and into the kitchen. When it jumped up on the counter next to the coffee pot, I was able to get my first real good look at him. There was no collar, no obvious signs of pet shop grooming, and he smelled too much like the lake at the center of town to have lived inside somewhere. "Where did you come from?" I asked quietly as I rubbed the top of his head. An abrupt meow in return made me step back. He shifted closer to the edge of the counter, but his eyes never left mine. "Was that back talk?" I asked with a slight laugh. I rolled my eyes at how jumpy I was. Another meow filled the kitchen, and he shifted even closer. "Nope, you have to go, sir." A sudden bout of the shakes came over me as I swooped the cat up in my arms. "You're a cat, and if I'm questioning if you're talking to me, that means I'm finally losing the last of my sanity." I opened the back door and plopped him on the back steps. "No offense, but I can't afford that right now." I shut the door behind me and looked up at the morning sky, my eyes on the distant image of the moon in a half-hearted attempt to center myself. In a self-help book I read when I was in my 20s and on the brink of my last breakdown, I read that focusing on one thing can help ground the mind. If that didn't work, which my hope was growing smaller for the practice's success as I felt the heat in my face continue to rise, I remembered the cigarettes in my purse. "I wish you luck in finding your home, kitty. Godspeed and good luck." I bid the cat farewell and turned to go back inside, but the sliding glass door suddenly became jammed. My hands turned bright shades of pink and red the harder I tried to pry the door open. It refused to budge. Another louder than normal meow startled me. "Can you please stop doing that?" My voice was far too loud for so early in the morning, but the fear and confusion were beginning to get to me. Yet another meow came as a response. This time, though, when I looked down, he was gone. There was a wave of relief, but curiosity took over when I saw a mound of white fur sitting at the wooden fence that separated my yard from my neighbor's. The cat was staring through the branches of a bush at their yard, where their garden and lawn chairs sat. I hesitated. I could have walked around to the other side of the house, broken in my window, gone back to bed, and told myself the cat was merely a vivid dream. But I couldn't. There was an odd pull that wrapped around me when I laid eyes on that massive bush at the corner of their yard. My neighbor always kept the leaves off my yard and the branches neatly trimmed, so I never paid it or the family who lived there any mind. You don't talk back to me." A familiar voice, one who's called over the fence a handful of times when my mail ended up in their box by accident, carried through the air from the other side of the bush. I crouched down low beside the cat and listened closely. My blood ran cold when I heard a small boy and saw his Spider-Man pajama shirt balled up in the man's fist. "Yes, sir," the small boy said through stifled sobs. "I work all goddamn night to keep a roof over your head. You show me respect or you end up here with your mother." The man pointed to the bush. "You understand? You think I'm playing?" "Yes, sir, I understand." Through the leaves, I caught a glimpse of his tear-stained and splotchy cheeks. The sight of such a young boy, he couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, being dragged across the yard and threatened by his father, brought tears to my eyes. The ghost of the sharp sting of my own father's hand lingered on my skin from years ago. I stayed as still as possible until the man thought he had made his message clear enough to bring his son back inside. God only knows what happened when the door closed. When they were gone, I ran back to my house and threw the back door open with ease this time. The cat was trailing closely behind, all the way back to my bedroom, where my cell phone still sat plugged into the charger. When the police arrived, I was standing outside with my cigarette, coffee, and the cat. When the small boy emerged from the back door with an officer and showed her to the bush where the morning's threats unfolded, the young officer turned pale and sickly. She called over her radio and, before long, a team had the backyard looking like an excavation site. It was a rumor in town that the boy's mother ran off with a coworker when they both went missing, but it turned out neither of them had gone very far. I stomped out my cigarette with the toe of my slipper and watched the little boy crawl into the back of a police car. He looked tired, more than any 7-year-old should. It felt like looking in a mirror. A chill ran up my spine when I thought of the cat. I looked down at my feet where he had been sitting, but he was no longer there. All that was left in his place was a tuft of white fur.